Hi, this is Steve Cook. In this series of videos, I'm looking at some academic terms which are frequently used in biblical studies. In some of my recent blog posts, I've been writing about the process by which the Bible was written or rewritten, and I've used terms such as redaction, redactional layers, redactor, and so on. So in this video, I want to have a look at these terms and how biblical scholars use them. In some ways, the scholarly discussion began with the question of who wrote the Pentateuch, what we commonly call the 5 books of Moses. Some translations, such as the King James Version, for example, will head these books the first book of Moses, commonly called Genesis, the second book of Moses, commonly called Exodus, and so on. But several texts in these books appear to have been written about Moses rather than by Moses. For example, Numbers 12 says, "Now the man Moses was very humble, more so than anyone else on the face of the earth." Deuteronomy 34 refers to the death and burial of Moses at the age of 120. And later in the same chapter it says, "And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." These texts appear to have been written about Moses rather than by Moses. Baruch Spinoza, a 16th or 17th century Dutch Jewish scholar, questioned Moses' authorship of these books because he said it was unlikely that Moses would have written so immodestly about himself, to say he was the most humble man on earth, for example. The author of these verses also clearly knew that the subsequent history of Israel and had something to compare Moses with. And so he could say, "Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses," something that Moses himself could hardly have said. He argued that the Torah, or the Pentateuch, was written by Ezra after the exile. In later scholarship, Julius Wellhausen, a late 19th century German scholar, suggested that the Pentateuch was actually written by several different authors or editors, and that the process took several centuries. He referred to 4 sources or contributors, editors or redactors of the Pentateuch in Genesis in particular, in the Pentateuch in general, in Genesis in particular. And sometimes these are abbreviated as J, E, D, and P. J was the Yahwist, who used the tetragrammaton, the name of God. E was the Elohist. He always used Elohim when speaking of God. The book of Deuteronomy was written by the Deuteronomist, but also he contributed to other editing or redactions of other books in the Pentateuch. And finally, there was P, a priestly source, scribes attached or affiliated with the temple. While Wellhausen's documentary hypothesis has been challenged and modified in scholarship a great deal since then, the consensus remains that these books were edited or redacted over a period of time, although there is no universal agreement about who the authors were or when they were written or redacted. So by redaction, we refer to the process of editing that took place in the composition of the Bible. And it's argued that the writers, the redactors of the various books of the Bible, collected a series of writings on a similar theme and created a definitive and coherent work. Multiple sources of text were combined and modified to make a single document. This may have occurred in stages over a period of time and by more than one editor or redactor. Hence we speak about editorial layers. Sometimes we come across the terms source criticism and redaction criticism. Source criticism refers to the scholarly analysis of texts to identify the sources behind what we have as the final form. Redaction criticism examines the intentions of the authors or the editors, the redactors, in this process. I can just give one example of this. In the second book of Kings, we have this a common formula. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, sometimes followed by words to the effect that he followed the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he caused Israel to sin. He did not depart from them. These words are attached to almost every record of every king in Israel and Judah. However, several kings, especially in the Jehu dynasty, were commended and rewarded and treated favourably in the narrative. Yet the accounts of their kingships still ended with the same formulaic condemnation, sometimes without explanation. There's something odd about this, that the kings were commended in the narrative, but the story ends by them saying, "He did evil in the sight of the Lord." And this suggests to many scholars that this condemnatory formula was added by a later editor or redactor who tarred all the kings with the same brush. To look closely at a further example of this, in the second book of Kings, chapter 24, we have the account of Zedekiah's reign. And includes the words in verse 19, "He did what was displeasing to the Lord, just as Jehoiakim had done," and gives the reason for it, that Jerusalem and Judah were cause of anger for the Lord, and he cast them out of his presence. This account of Zedekiah's reign is repeated in Jeremiah 52. It appears that the writer of Jeremiah 52 probably had 2 Kings in front of him when he wrote this, because he writes verbatim. It's almost word for word the same as in 2 Kings 24. But the odd thing is, in the Greek Septuagint translation of Jeremiah 52, the condemnation of Zedekiah, which is in Jeremiah 52 verses 2 and 3 and following, is simply not there. Did the Septuagint Greek translator decide to leave these words out for some reason? It would be hard to explain why he would do that. Or is it that he was using an earlier edition of Jeremiah 52 or 2 Kings 24, which had been written before the redactor had added, "He did what was displeasing to the Lord," and so on? That alternative, that interpretation, in my mind, is the most likely one. And so it appears that the writer of 2 Kings 24 and Jeremiah 52 used a different edition of the Hebrew Bible, or these earlier texts, to what the Septuagint Greek translator was. There are many examples of this. I've just given one, and I've explained this more fully in a couple of blog posts. The links to those blog posts are below.